So we are here at the Open IoT Summit, and we have with us the founder of Arduino project. I mean, I'm a big fan of Arduino project, and I think who is not? So I do know you kind of very well, but just for the sake of this interview, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Massimo Banzi. I'm the co-founder of the Arduino project and also Arduino, the company. And also another thing I do is I teach interaction design in a couple of universities, mostly in Europe. And I'm involved in a bunch of other things that are related to the maker movement and events and other things like that.
So when did this idea of creating, this board come into your mind? Why did you create it?
Well, I started because in 2002 I went to teach in this design school in the northwest of Italy called the Interaction Design Institute Ivrea, and the objective was to, it was a master's degree where we try to apply design to the way we interact with things that now are mostly made of digital technology. So a lot of things that we use every day, they can be very easy and very simple and very pleasurable to use, and some other things can be very annoying. And so we need to try to make it simple and easy for people to use the things that we design with technology. So we worked at trying to figure out how to make electronics simple enough that somebody is smarter can pick it up in a few weeks and use it as a tool, as a creative tool. So that kind of was the work I was doing. And in this process, I worked on a number of projects. And so the last project I worked on is Arduino, which kind of summarized the work that we did in the previous research.
Right. Why did you choose to keep it open source?
Well, I guess Linux was a huge inspiration because I have been using Linux for many years, and so we saw the power of these open source communities that are driven by a lot of passionate users, and when the technology starts to solve problems in their life, they start to kind of use these technologies everywhere, and they sort of have this bottom-up power where they sort of start show up in all sorts of crazy places. Because we realize that in a lot of situations, when you try to make things happen from the top, the amount of effort that you have to make is huge, and obviously you have a competition of a bunch of commercial entities, while these bottom-up communities have a real powerful. And also we wanted the project to be as easy as possible to replicate. So we, at the very beginning, we were not manufacturing hardware. We were basically giving away just the design, and people would make it themselves, and we would help people remotely. So the whole idea of starting to make our own hardware happened because we realized that we needed to simplify people's life even more by giving them pre-made hardware. But the open source aspect is really the benefit of having, lived with Linux for many years.
And I mean, there is a big community around Arduino these days. What is your involvement, not only with the community, but also, the organization itself? Well,
so Arduino is a company right now, and since everything in Arduino is open source, so the hardware, the software, the IDE, even the documentation is released with Creative Commons, the only thing that's protected is the name Arduino. So a bunch of other open source projects have this thing where the brand is like Firefox, for example, by Mozilla, so the brands are protected and the technology is available for anybody. So we make hardware, branded Arduino, that we use to sort of support the work that we do on the platform. And then there's a big open source project attached to it because people have adopted and adapted Arduino to run on a bunch of hardware that we originally didn't support. So right now we try to make it as simple as possible for people to add the new features to Arduino, and we support directly the hardware that we build. And we find so that's how we kind of split the work between working with the community and having a sustainable business that kind of supports the open source side as well.
Yeah, because sometimes when people think about open source, they usually think about free of cost, but commercialization plays a very big role, because commercialization you cannot even sustain and survive. So
yeah, one of the things that I guess a lot of people don't realize is that a ton of important open source projects, even Linux, are contributed to mostly by people who are paid by their company to do this.
right.
So companies who have a way to employ open source in their business will pay developers to contribute to open source.
Right.
So yes, there's a ton of people that are individual contributors because they use it, they feel like it, but the bulk of the contribution now come from people who are paid by their company. So our business model enables us to support the open source side of things.
Right. Even with Linux, it has been 27 years old, but it picked up, when commercialization happened. Like if you look at Kubernetes and OpenStack, it's successful from day one because commercialization was, kind of baked into the project itself, where somebody has to pay bills, somebody had to pay a mortgage, so it has to come from. When you look at, the whole movement that was started by Arduino, project. And what do you think what role has it played in this world that we live in today? I think there's always an Arduino powered device somewhere around us, no matter where we are.
Well, I think so. One thing that I think it's was useful is that a ton of people that never thought they would be what they call embedded developers picked up digital electronics, they picked up programming, they started to build things. So I guess one of the tricks was to basically not tell them that they were embedded developers. You just use electronics as a creative medium. The first people who used Arduino were designers, artists, musicians, people doing performance.
Right.
So it started off as a highly creative tool, and then it became a tool for people to also innovate on products. And so it really enabled thousands of people to start using electronics as a tool to innovate, create companies. So that, in my opinion, is the interesting part. So we didn't try to compete with the people that were already building tools for developing on microcontrollers because they knew what they were doing, talking to a professional audience. We wanted to enable the other million people to be able to participate in this kind of innovation.
Right. And when you talk about, people are doing so many things with that, there are so many different use cases of Arduino that are there. But you also said that your focus is, not on those people, your focus is on, enabling new people to come and help. But are there any use cases that you are really interested in? We should kind of enable either that community so that they can use the board to...
Well, I guess at the beginning of the history of Arduino, the issue was let's teach people how to use microcontrollers to build things that are powered by these technologies. And then IoT happened, and the problem became, so how do we make it easy for people to build IoT devices? And then alongside Arduino, a bunch of open source hardware and software, Linux single board computer happened, and the problem became, how do we make it simpler for people to use Linux? Because Linux still requires quite a bit of knowledge, especially embedded Linux. So we're doing work to make it simpler for people to adopt embedded Linux platforms. There are even more scenarios where Arduino, I just recently was teaching a class on how to apply machine learning, artificial intelligence creatively. And I realized that we are we are still in a world where the technology is very powerful, but the tools are very complex to use. So there's always a technology that you can make simpler.
So what are the next, things that you are focusing on? You think that's, okay, this is our next, stage?
So one of the things that we are now doing a lot of work on is cloud platforms.
Okay.
So because we realize, okay, we made the hardware simple, cheap, we have a ton of different hardwares, great. But then when you want to build a real IoT project, then you need a cloud component. And a lot of the cloud software right now, it's very complex to use.
Right.
So we want to create tools that are simple to use, that support a ton of the classic use cases so that people can easily build functioning IoT projects without having to understand every single technology along the chain, making it secure out of the box so that they can start businesses, they can solve problems. Maybe they don't start a business, maybe they do it non-profit, it doesn't matter. They solve problems, they create things.
Right.
So part of that We're going to be releasing a ton of open source software there, but our focus is always user experience. How do I make the experience of building an IoT application very simple, from the node that's connected to your sensor, to the edge gateway, to the cloud, to the way I view the data. Everything needs to be like seamless and simple to use. So that's one of the things we're focusing on right now. And so, for example, today we announced, for example, that you can use Arduino to program Linux machines, that you can connect Raspberry Pis, for example, or Intel Linux machines to the Arduino cloud, and you can manage remotely, and you can update software, you can install software, you can do all sorts of maintenance on these Linux machines, all through like a very simple web interface. That for me, for example, is another step of applying the Arduino philosophy to something that's complicated for a ton of people and making it super simple.
Can you explain what is Arduino Cloud? How does that?
Yeah, so the Arduino Cloud is a platform that's slowly evolving. It's called create.arduino.cc. It started off as us taking our development environment and bringing it to the cloud. So that you just need a browser and you can edit code, you can compile code, you can download it into different Arduino boards. Then we started to add a section where people can publish very detailed tutorials on how to build things. So that if you see somebody else's project and you like it and you want to build it, you press a button and that becomes a project in your cloud, for example. So you can make it very easy for people to share their knowledge. And then we started now to add a bunch of IoT features, like managing all these Linux machines, programming this Linux machine like they were an Arduino machine, because you have literally millions of people that know how to program an Arduino. So by giving them a way to take their knowledge on top of a Linux device, then you're enabling them to do a ton of things that they were not able to do before. And you even allow them to use things like OpenCV. So we have examples where you can use Arduino to do computer vision on an Intel Edge device, but you're recycling your existing Arduino knowledge.
So when you talk about the cloud, is it like a private cloud using some open source technologies, or I'm just
So the idea is that what we have right now is a bunch of modules that are based on a bunch of open source components that we release openly, freely. That's sitting on top of Amazon AWS, which are kindly sponsoring. So for example, we are able to offer this thing for free to a ton of people in the community because Amazon is helping us. Then what happens is the more modules will start to appear online, then it will evolve. It's evolving already into like a full-fledged IoT application development platform. And that will be available again as an open source tool that you can install on like a single server, or you can or you will be able to get it as a white label. So if you start off playing around with Arduino and you build a project and it becomes a product, and then you can turn your account into a white label account and start serving customers with this thing, and you can scale. So the idea is to really create more and more path that go from an idea to a kind of viable product that actually solves problems and remove obstacles along the way.
So since Arduino has a very strong focus on open source, did you ever consider using OpenStack kind of solution to power the cloud itself, or in the future, or?
So right now, the work that we are doing is built a lot on Kubernetes. So whatever platform that supports Kubernetes will be able to support our tools.
Kubernetes is everywhere these days. It's becoming kind of Linux of cloud, literally. And so we are very lucky that we have Amazon support,
and also our CIO Luca, who is very sort of good and forward-looking. So
and when you talk about this cloud, right now it's free of cost. Are you planning to commercialize it in the future for more advanced use cases, or?
Yeah. So the idea is that now users get a bunch of, they can get. They can use the platform for free. Some of the features are available for free also because the code that you put there is automatically open source. The moment people will want to start having private code they don't want to share with people, or they want to connect a lot of devices, then we will introduce this summer a paid version. But again, it will be a little bit based on, if you want, you can have it open source on your machine, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, GitHub does that too. You can have a private repository internally, and you can have public repository.
So at the moment, the software you put there is open source by nature. But then in the summer, you can choose.
Yeah, you can.
I want to pay some money, and then it's private to me. And there also will be some tools in the platform that will be included in this subscription, because maybe I cannot go into much detail right now, but there are some tools that are very intensive in terms of computation.
Right.
So that we need to also pass on this cost to the people.
And then not everybody wants to use that. There are certain people who want to use that. And it makes perfect sense, because you may not want, even if open source, you may not want to have your code publicly available if you're a company. So it makes sense to have a private repository somewhere within the...
So the strategy in Arduino is always to have one open source option where I can do everything myself open source, one free option for people that want the simplicity but don't really want to, or they cannot spend money.
Right.
And then a paid version. So if you have a free version, you also have to adhere to the open source ideas. If you don't want to adhere to open source and you want to do it, you pay money. So there are three different models, and I think they cover.
That's the perfect model. Yeah, you are here. You mentioned it looks like IoT has become very very important for Arduino, and this is the first time you're at Open IoT Summit, or you have been to this summit before?
No, it's the first time I come. I think
Why did you decide to come this year?
Well, so I received an invitation, and sometimes I get invited to a lot of these things, but sometimes I try to accept when I have something to say that would make some sense for the place where I'm going. So since we have been doing quite a lot of work right now on IoT
space,
and we actually did a lot of IoT by using a lot of open source projects that are existing. And we had this thing that we could now support Linux as a platform for Arduino. Then we thought, okay, we should show up and just tell the world that people can now do this. And also because we are now getting to the point that we are starting to contribute back to open source IoT projects in the work that we're doing. So we are probably now in a better position to talk to the people in this event.
Right. But I mean, Arduino has been, there's not enough nice things that I can say about this project because I myself am a heavy user also. I mean, it's a kind of revolution, right, in itself. But, when you look at all these users who are using it now, IoT has become a huge thing. What are the big challenges that you see for Arduino project, that you see there's a potential, but that's also a big challenge that you want to tackle?
Well, for example, a lot of people are trying to do IoT. And there's a lot of, for example code for a bunch of different platforms online. But for example, things like security is completely, we'll take care of that later. So clearly we're trying to build tools where we try to embed security in the tools that we build, in the code, in the hardware. We are trying to produce code and example that explain how to harden, how to make your projects secure. We are building tools that simplify some of the challenges that people have. Because right now, most of the people who are building functioning IoT systems, they are experts.
Right.
While we want to enable, like we did with Arduino at the beginning, we want to enable a ton of people to do IoT projects. Again, one of the challenges, IoT platforms are complicated. They're very difficult to set up. You need to understand how to manage servers. Also, normally they are never really scalable. So you can install them on a server, and when that server crashes, your project is gone. So if you're playing around, if you're a student learning, that's fine. But if you want to start, really using it, even being able to reliably control the thermostat at your home, then you need a reliable platform. It needs to be secure. So we're really trying to figure out how we can simplify this whole process.
When you talk about security, that's of course critical. The problem is that some platforms are not designed to even get security updates. The mechanism is not there for a user to update it. Sometimes companies create projects, but those companies move out of business, or a lot of Chinese vendors, they make it, then move to the next cycle. So how do you really plan? Because now you have your own cloud where you can really push things. So how do you really plan to tackle this problem?
So a lot of Arduino projects are still built with microcontrollers, so they are a little bit less. A lot of these attacks that have happened in the past have actually taken advantage of the fact that a bunch of these Chinese vendors, they put old version of Linux with default passwords on the devices. So clearly that's a problem. But a lot of projects done with microcontrollers are less sensitive to those kind of attacks. Then we started to add to every piece of hardware that we make that's IoT, we started to add these chips that are essentially secure elements. So they are chip where you can securely store some data, which is not readable from the outside. So you can store certificates, you can store private keys. So for example, some of the code that we provide allows one of our devices to connect to Amazon AWS without any credentials stored in the software. That's a big problem. People take a device, they reverse engineer the software, they find private keys, they find API keys, and they connect, and they basically crack, they basically find a way to enter into the cloud. So by doing this, the device is secure, and so we solved that part, I think. We're trying to do similar things on Linux. So we're really trying to figure out ways where we can tell people, okay, you're building a product, and as much as we can, we'll give you something that's secure by default. That's a big task, and a bunch of people are just putting that like, oh yeah, this is an exercise left to the reader.
Right.
No, that's a big problem.
Second part of the security is privacy. It's not just a lot of people like Amazon keys, where they literally let you, driver can open the door and come inside. How important is that? Because you're moving to cloud, and cloud, have access to it.
So in one way, the fact that we like this edge computing concept is because we think that people should have kind of cloud-like computing that kind of sits next to where they are, that they own completely. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that we are very concerned with privacy. And for example, as Arduino, we don't really profile or track the users that much, and we don't want to invade too much in their privacy. Also, I think there are some interesting things that are happening right now. For example, in Europe, there is this new EU law, GDPR, that's coming into effect in May, which has some very, very strict rules. So we think that, in a way, as Europeans, we are a little bit more concerned of how our privacy and where our data goes, and we are embedding those values into the cloud that we are building. We think that there are cloud providers from other countries where these aspects are less relevant. There's going to have a lot of problems because,
But since you're using AWS, so how are you going to manage that? Because AWS kind of, there will be a lot of jurisdiction problems, or you're using the Amazon's, European, how does...
So at the moment, the use that we do of the AWS IoT platform is mostly as a connection layer. So there's not a lot of personal data that kind of sits there. And also, as I said, the architecture that we are building right now is based on Kubernetes. So you can actually move it to any provider that supports Kubernetes. You can even, people will be able, if they want to run this code on their own hardware if they want to.
Or they can set up their own private cloud with OpenStack or something like that and move there. But when you look at the whole IoT movement that is going on, and you yourself are building the cloud with that, what is the future that you see? Where Arduino will be there? Are you? I mean, I'm not going to talk about Tesla cars or going to Mars. But other than that, from your perspective, what do you think that where will you be in the 5 years?
So one of the things I'm doing right now in Europe, which I'm quite passionate about, is something that is totally unsexy and people, but it's very important. So for example, in Europe, we have the economy is based a lot on small and medium companies. And these small and medium companies, they generally don't have the same resources or the same people that bigger companies have. So they are struggling to implement this kind of new technologies. In Europe, it's called Industry 4.0. It's industrial IoT in the US. So the idea is that we are really trying to enable these people to implement these technologies in their businesses, because we like, the small and medium companies. We like the people who really, believe in what they do, and they create companies that actually also contribute to creating work and, society functions, because you have entrepreneurs who are able to, create sustainable companies. So we really want to enable these people to take advantage of this Industry 4.0 revolution. So Arduino can, we are working on education so that not only children but also adults can convert to, and to go through this digital transformation and understand these technologies. We want to make open source tools that small and medium companies can use to implement IoT in their businesses.
Right.
There are large platforms that are super powerful, super complicated, but some of these platforms are simply unapproachable by a smaller company.
Right.
But we can help. We have helped companies do things like, we work with a company that makes sensors that sit on trees and they measure pears as they grow.
Wow.
And they are able
How many sensors are there? Like in a tree, there can be.
No, they usually measure one pear per tree.
Okay.
But there's a small sensor that feels the kind of the pear growing and is able to alert the farmer when it's time to kind of pick the fruits. Other small sensors that allow people to detect parasites. Other sensors where you can help a small company maybe apply more smart maintenance. Apply this kind of IoT technology to the products they make. So this kind of stuff usually doesn't go on newspapers and magazines, because it's kind of boring for a lot of people. But this is what solves everyday problem, creates jobs, makes the world run. It actually maybe helps people work better, work less. But, so there's a lot of these interesting things that I'm interested in because they impact real people.
Right. I recall I met somebody from University of Messina last year at OpenStack Foundation because they are building the smart city. So I wrote a story for Linux Pro, and that was, they're using all Arduino sensors and everything to collect, all the sensor from the data. So a lot of, interesting work is going on. So that's really exciting. Anything else you would like to say before we wrap up this interview?
No, I think I'm very excited about the work that we just did to enable Arduino on Linux, and really want a bunch of people to use it to tell us, if it works for them, if they like it, what's missing. So, we just put it out there today. And I would really love to get some feedback, constructive feedback.
Oh, yes.
So, try it out and, let us know. And
well,
that's it.
Thank you so much for, it was great talking to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My pleasure.